DCM works, trying to explain stuff we don't fully understand. Hey guys, welcome back to the Art for Artists podcast, the official podcast of digital and creative media works. I am your... Whoa, what? No, David, DCM, creative director, lead writer, joined by my
You were
co-host
going
always
somewhere.
Ben.
I was like, you're going to say, like,
No.
I am your host.
Yeah, I
But
I
then you
lost
flubbed.
it. This is
Also,
Ben.
hi.
Yeah. Oh, God, I'm having trouble with my intros today.
Yeah.
No, we've been doing this for so long. I don't know how I keep fucking them up.
It's getting funnier every time.
Yeah, it is. And today we're talking about the magic of the Kingkiller Chronicles,
Which I've never read.
Yes. Basically, the way that
Yeah.
this show is going to work, this particular
This segment.
kind of topic that we're doing, when we do the magic of or the powers of, one of us is going to try and explain it to the other one.
Because most of the time, one of us wouldn't have seen, read,
or
experienced,
or understood a
or
particular
understands
given
it.
thing. Yeah. So basically, I'm going to go through Sympathy, which is which is sort of the physics-based magic in this world. So there's actually more than one type of magic. So there's Sympathy, there's Naming, there's Alchemy, and then there's Sigildry.
So I've been briefly introduced to one of those.
To one of them. So we're going to talk about the one that you've been briefly introduced to,
Yeah.
which is Sympathy. So the basis behind Sympathy is that you create a sympathetic link between two objects so that whatever you do to one affects another.
So, yeah.
So, like, okay, so
it's like quantum tunneling.
I don't know. Sure. Yeah, I guess.
So,
I guess.
You explain. I'll
The blank logo, I was like...
I'll explain physics in a bit.
Jeez, okay, quantum tunneling?
It's quantum linking, I think.
Yeah, that's probably more
technical
similar
word.
to.
Yeah.
So
Something a bit
basically, like,
different.
if you create a link between two coins, and you move... So you move one coin...
Like with your hand.
With your hand, the other coin will move the same way.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the coin that is not directly acted on will move the same way, but you have to lift... Like, the coin that you're lifting will weigh twice as much.
Yeah.
Because conservation of energy and momentum and stuff means that it...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is bullshit for a magic system. Because it's like,
Why?
oh, we gotta, magic, but also we gotta follow Newtonian
No, it's
physics.
awesome. It makes it really interesting because it means that the rules make sense. So like there's more rules than that, but basically
Yeah.
like if like it's not a perfect link, so there's always some energy lost in the connection.
Yeah.
So you
Entropy.
You will usually have to use a tiny bit more energy than it would take to just lift two coins.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's not just limited to motion. So, like, you can do heat as well. So, if you link two objects and you put one in the fire, and you have the right link,
You give it thermal energy.
Yeah, so there's a thermal transfer that occurs. So we'll go through the different types of links in a minute. But basically, like, the energy to do these actions can be taken from various places. So you can take it from your own body, so like your own body heat,
Yeah.
that you transfer into the energy of doing it, or from, like, nearby energy sources. They usually use fires in this world, or, like, furnaces.
Yeah.
Because they're really good links. They have tons of energy. So there's like there's 5 basic doctrines that define how sympathy works. So you've got the doctrine of correspondence, which is basically that similarity enhances sympathy. So the more similar two objects are, the easier they are to bind.
Yeah.
So a copper coin and a copper coin are way easier to bind than like a copper coin and a branch.
Yeah.
So that kind of means that if you bind a coin with a coin and you lift the coin, it's going to weigh a little bit more than 2 coins. But if you bind a coin with a branch, the coin is gonna weigh a ton more because you lose a lot more energy because the link isn't as good.
Yeah, there's the extra baggage of
trying to
lifting
link
something
two
different.
things. Yeah, because like which comes back to like the principle of consanguinity, which is hard to say.
What?
It's actually a real word. He hasn't invented that. That's a real word.
Yeah.
Which means that a piece of a thing can represent the whole of a thing. So like, if you have a piece of wood that you set on fire, you have a campfire and you take a piece of wood that's on fire from that campfire, you can bind that fire to the other fire and they represent the same fire. So say you put that log in a bucket of water,
It puts out the other fire.
puts out the other fire.
Okay.
Kind of thing. And then you've got the law of conservation, which we have, which is energy cannot be destroyed or created.
Yeah.
Then you have the really cool bits that are like the fascinating things that kind of come from the character stuff. So you've got the Heart of Stone, which is a frame of mind in which a sympathist is able to shut out distraction of emotions and focus rational thought to the effect of being able to create sympathetic links. So Heart of Stone is like, to create a sympathetic link, you need Heart of Stone to create Allah, and Allah is the other doctrine. So Allah is...
How's that spelled? Like, literally?
A-L-A-R.
I was going to say, like, A-double-L-A-H.
No.
It's like,
that
what?
would be rude. So Allah is like a faith-controlled... It's a personal faith controlled by will that is forceful enough to impose its energy on reality. So you have to have a firm law in order to maintain a belief that those two coins are linked.
It's almost like doublethink.
It's exactly like doublethink. So you have to believe... The way that they talk about it is like you split... The way that you train your mind to do this is you split your mind into two separate parts and believe two conflicting things at once. Yeah. So like... You have to believe both that the coins are linked and that the coins are not linked for the coins to actually link. Yeah. If that makes sense. So it's a really hard thing to do, and really, really good sympathists can split their mind into more than two pieces. Okay. So to create a binding takes two things. It takes the belief. So like to create a link, you need one part of your mind. So you need one Allah, effectively. Yeah. To create two links, you need two Allah. So if you wanted to link a coin with a fire with another coin, that would be 3. Right, but you could do stuff like there's a crazy thing that
is it like exponential? So if to link 3 things, you need 8.
Yes,
4?
To the power of
4 to the power of n for n links.
No, not necessarily, but you need to the power of whatever that is energy. Okay. So it's like creating 3 bindings is more than triple as hard as creating 1. Yeah. It's like 9 times harder. So like say for instance,
so it's cubic.
It is, yeah. That is cubic, yeah.
That's fucked.
It's rough, man. So it means that it's really hard to do, and there's like some really dangerous stuff that can be involved with it, because if you bind if you use your body heat to try and do something that is like ridiculously difficult, you can give yourself like hypothermia. Yeah. And like they call it binder's chills, and people can die from it and stuff like that. But then you also have slippage. So slippage is like, if you want to bind a fire to something else, so say you want to use the heat of a fire to set someone else on fire. Yeah. Right? So you bind the fire to an arrowhead that you set the arrow on fire, and you shoot the arrow, and you bind the arrow to the fire, the arrow hits the guy sets on fire. That energy, so the heat that travels between them, that thermal energy, there's slippage. So because there's so much heat, you run the risk of actually like overheating your body because you're trying to transfer too much heat. Yeah. So you can get these things where like, people will set themselves on fire sometimes by accident, or get binder's chills and die of hypothermia. So it's like some dangerous shit. Yeah. But there's 7 different types of binding, but I'm not going to run through all of them because they kind of are similar. But basically, like, as I said before, there's not just the binding of motion. There's also the binding of heat. There's also chemical or catalytic binding, which we never really see used, but like the binding Kavoth suggests to use in order to dissolve the oil that makes a bird's feather smooth. Like it kind of I don't know how to explain this one other than it lets you change the chemical properties of something through a link. Okay. We don't ever really get to see how this works, but it's apparently
is it
used...
almost like being able to do like a chemical reaction at a distance?
Yeah, without like a particular... So like you could react...
So you can have like acid in one place, plastic at the other, and then sort of turn the plastic into whatever the addition of...
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you combine those two. Yeah. But again, it's like you need that heat to do that. So you like it's all about sort of that conservation of heat and energy. And then you've got the really cool one, which is where you can transfer it's capacitorial kinetic luminosity, which you can use to make stuff. It like transfers energy into light, which is really cool because we can't do that in our world. That's so pretty much. Odd. But so like it's the motion to light binding, and it's really hard to do without a piece of metal to focus. So like if you imagine like if you have a piece of iron in your hand, you can imagine lighting that piece of iron up from like, because it's easy to imagine, but to do it from your hand is really hard. Yeah. So you basically bind. Yeah, it's the process of binding like light from heat effectively, so it's really hard to do.
That's really weird,
and we can't do it in our world. I mean, which is why it's so cool.
You could like, I don't know, take like infrared, or like ultraviolet, and then just like shift it through using giving more energy or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. Like, does light come off the object, or like does the object just suddenly not become a shadow essentially? Like
I think it's like it's never really explained, but it kind of seems like what happens is there's some transfer of like, it doesn't have to happen through like a medium, like you can just do it in your hand. Yeah. But they have what are called sympathy lamps, which are like, they're made from sigildry, but it's the same principle where you hold a lamp and the heat from your hand creates light. Okay. So it's a similar idea where like you're basically it's a straight transfer.
Yeah.
And so like if you bind it with your hand becomes the thing that's lit up.
It's very weird.
Yeah, it's really strange. It leads for it kind of lends itself to some cool stuff.
Yeah.
And gets really confusing when you combine that with like the sigildry, which is like making sympathy permanent. So like, yeah, the sympathy lamp is the most basic version of that, where it's just like a normal, like a little lamp. But when you hold it, because your hand is hot, it uses the basic heat of your hand to just create like a light.
Yeah.
But then you can do more complicated stuff, like there's stuff that involve at one point the main character builds this mechanism that can stop arrows from a distance. With like it's like this crazy. It's really cool, but it can stop arrows from a distance without touching them, basically. Because he builds it to bind. It basically binds the arrows, and then they fall from the air.
Yeah.
Which is awesome, but it gets really, really confusing when they also add like, there's like linear galvanic attraction, which is like you change the magnetism of an object.
God.
So it gets really like complicated.
So it's sort of just plays with just different states of matter, essentially.
Yeah, and being able to like control and manipulate the way that they interact with the rest of the world.
Because it uses a very general like idea of energy.
Yeah.
Which, like, to be fair, some science does as well, because we sort of just agree that everything's energy. Most things are energy.
I think the thing that's really cool about the way that they do it is that it means that like in any situation you understand the risk of doing something even if you don't quite understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So like there's he at one point they're hunting bandits and they kill one of the bandit scouts and he's got a knife and there's like 20 bandits and there's 3 of them. And so he binds the body of the bandit to the body of another bandit and stabs the corpse, and the guy gets stabbed.
Yeah.
And like, it's some metal shit. Like, it gets really dark. Cause then he like just starts slashing throats and shit.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of energy to do that. So then it gets harder and harder to cut the corpse.
Oh, okay.
So I always feel like that's the easiest, like the thing that makes the most sense to try and describe it as. So, but you get stuff like that where it's it gets really hard for him. So he's like trying to cut the corpse's throat, but it becomes really fucking hard because he's used a lot of his energy, and the link gets weaker and weaker the more you try and do it, because you're obviously getting more and more tired. And then he gets binder's chills because he's done it too much and it's raining or whatever.
Yes, it seems to use a lot of theory, like law of thermodynamics.
Yeah,
which is fair because everything follows the law of thermodynamics. The quantum linking thing, physics time with Ben.
So give me the
It's kind of this weird idea that it's a combination of a few things. There's the idea that given an infinite universe, if you go far enough in either space or time, you'll find exact copies of everything.
Okay.
So like it's just the law of big numbers that like given a random
random sample size, infinite random sample size.
An infinite random like variability, you'll eventually find it's the same as where you'll find every work of fiction in pi. Because pi is an infinite random sequence of numbers.
Yeah.
Or some encoding of every...
Whatever it is, yeah.
And quantum linking is this further idea that because that object is exactly the same, any motion done to one object will be replicated in the other.
Yeah.
Because if you have these two states which are identical, they're going to move in the same way because they're identical. It sort of like throws out... I know
what you mean.
Yeah, it sort of follows like a deterministic view of the universe based on just physics and just throws out the theory of chaos, which is a whole other thing entirely.
But I guess what that kind of implies is that somewhere else, so like say you move to the left, but the exact copy moves to the right. Somewhere else there's an exact copy that moves to the right as well.
Yeah, and somewhere else there's one that followed you and moved to the left.
To the left, yeah okay. That makes sense.
So it's this weird, and like that, like sympathy is almost like a weird way of controlling that property of...
Yeah, it's influencing reality in that way. I think that's kind of... There's something to be said for like the way that functions in the sense that like he's clearly thought through, like Patrick Rothfuss has clearly been like, how do I create a magic system that is like really grounded and easy? Like at no point, once you get the basic explanation of the books, he learns more complex stuff, but at the heart of it, you don't need to understand exactly what he's doing to understand the risks.
Yeah, the thing with physics is that if you make a system based around physics, it'll be very easy for most people to understand. You'll find this with like sort of like first like entry level physics classes. You'll walk in and someone will, just like the first few weeks will just be stuff that you're like, yeah, isn't that obvious? Because we live in a world which follows physics. Yes. It's only when you get into like
quantum stuff
and stuff on like a molecular level,
which is
like,
it's a different world.
It's confusing, yeah, because it's a different world. But when you're just like, yeah, stuff rolls down hills because of gravity, you're like, yeah,
obviously.
Of course.
But then you go, okay, but what if it rolled uphill, which is like quantum physics, basically, sometimes.
Well, it's like, you get stuff like the tricky stuff, where it's like, oh, two objects, like a bowling ball and a tennis ball, are dropped off a bridge, which one lands first?
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, the bowling ball because it's heavier. It's like, no, they fall at the same speed.
Yeah.
Well, fall at the same velocity. Yes. Acceleration. They fall with the same. They have the same amount of energy.
Yes.
And because gravitational physics.
Basically,
they land at the same time.
Yeah. So and that's the thing where like it's really hard for kids to understand that when you drop like a feather and a bowling ball in a vacuum, they fall at the same.
In a vacuum.
It's one of these things where it's like, okay, and then they go, okay, and then once they understand that, then you can do stuff like, I mean, I think that's why this magic is really cool, is that...
Because it gives you a very base... like, when you were explaining it the first time, if you had started with all that other all the other types of linking, I would have been like, what the fuck? But because it starts with...
The coin.
That's you can move a coin with a coin, but you have to move it twice as energetic, I guess, plus a little bit more just because of entropy.
Yeah.
Essentially. It's basically entropy.
Yeah, no, that is exactly it.
Or
and that's
friction.
Yeah, and they sometimes call the reverse of that is slippage, where that's why the heat can come back if you're transferring heat for great distances. But like I think, and that's the first explanation you actually get in the books as well. Is when the first time he gets explained sympathy, someone is using a coin to show him.
Yeah.
But they actually, I can't think of how they do it. They use wax somehow. I can't think of exactly what they do, but like the way that he explains it is like he puts the two coins in wax, like a little bay of wax, and he's like, when you move them, they're linked, or whatever. And like I can't think of exactly how it's explained, but and then sort of from there he's like, yeah, and then you believe they're linked and they are linked. And then I think one of the things that is interesting is what that means is you always have a baseline understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
So even like later on when he does a really complicated binding at one point where he binds like a tree so he binds an arrow to a tree, then he uses that binding to then bind to himself, to then bind to a lightning strike that hits the tree, and he transfers energy from the lightning strike to him through the arrow because he's got binder's chill. So he does that to get his body temperature up. But because there's so much slippage, he channels it back into the tree, and the tree explodes and kills like 20 bandits or whatever. But it's one of those things where like you don't really have to understand that at the time to understand the risk of what he's doing, because he says like in the book, he's like, I did this even though I knew the risks of slippage were like detrimental, but it was this or die from binder's chills. So like,
why does he bind the arrow?
I think he needed a link with the tree.
Oh yeah,
because the tree and the arrow
both made of wood,
and the guy, the archer who was shooting the arrow had a quiver of arrows on his back.
Yeah,
so it's easier to bind the arrow to the quiver of arrows to the tree than it is to bind just himself to the tree.
To the tree, yeah.
Whereas if you go tree, arrow, quiver yourself.
Yeah.
And then lightning.
You go the arrow that is sticking in me currently.
Yes.
To the quiver, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like thing, it's quite complicated. And then, but something like that, like you don't have to understand exactly what's going on, but you understand the risks because the system is based on something that's so like it's just really easy to understand.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, doing this.
Energy out.
Yeah, and like you're like, okay, the risks of
and a lightning bolt has a fuck ton of energy.
Has a ton. And they spend a lot of the book. You don't notice it because he's such a good writer, but they spend a lot of the first book slowly making you understand more deeply how the system works.
Yeah.
So they have what they call sympathy. I can't think what they call them. They compete in class to see who has a stronger will. So each person has a candle, and you have to stop the other person from lighting your candle.
And do they kind of like bounce links around the room to try and figure out sneaky ways?
So the way that they do it is one person gets to pick the source.
Oh, okay.
So like I think usually they'll just pick like a fire.
A flame, yeah.
But what they do is the students bet on it. So like they have a ranking each class, whoever's the best at it, and so the kids bet to see. So like, okay, I reckon Kavoth will win this one or whatever.
Yeah.
But so what they do
good
is
old
like
child betting.
Yeah. But so what they do is they'll do stuff like each person gets to pick their link. So one person will pick fire, but then Kavoth will pick. He'll be like, they'll be like, what source are you gonna use? He's like, I'll just use my blood, because then people will bet heavier against him, so he'll earn more money.
Yeah.
Because they think he's gonna lose, because it's really hard to beat someone who's using an actual fire source.
Yeah.
So then you need a stronger Allah to defeat their larger amount of energy they can bring to bear on your candle.
Yeah.
But so it's this weird thing where you've got to be controlling two links at once. So you're linking yourself to the heat source to their candle.
Yeah.
So you link the heat source to the candle, but then you're also linking your candle to somewhere else to try and stop it from lighting up.
Yeah.
So it's this weird like competition they do. But the interesting thing about that is that it's basically like, depending on how strong your belief is, depends on how well you can succeed in that challenge, in that arena. So
it's that double think again.
It's a double think, and that becomes like a big theme within the books, is that the reason that this character is so good at this sympathy is that he's got he's got a really good Allah. He can split his mind into like 5 different parts.
Yeah.
And on a good day 6 or whatever. Most people can do like 3 tops.
Yeah.
So it's this thing where suddenly the reason that he's like, the thing that's special about him in inverted commas isn't that he's got like some magic superpower. It's just that he's a little bit smarter than everyone else, just a little bit.
Yeah.
And then there's other stuff as well, but like, it's one of those things where it's a magic system that really benefits by being not ambiguous in the way it functions, and it never feels like anyone cheats the system. No one at any point breaks the laws of sympathy, because they can't.
Yeah, and it's kind of, when you have a system like that, it makes sort of, because everyone's grounded by those rules, someone doing something that is like quote unquote spectacular is actually more interesting, because it's not just a sudden power spike when you're like, oh, all of a sudden he just does this. It's and because especially if they go through like the process, if it's a very sort of like step-by-step thing, like sympathy is, it means like you can, like as a writer, you can explain it and be like, this is how it's done, or like, you know, allude to it. You don't have to just basically tell them, but it just makes it more interesting, and sort of, it kind of opens it up to like a lot of interpretation as well. Because if the writer decides to not explain how something happens, and you have this system in place that everyone follows, it means that as a reader you can go, I wonder how he did it. You know, like you can think of like, how would I have like done that in that situation, rather than if you just have a magic system where it's just magic. You're just like,
the Gandalf problem.
He's just like, oh, he just had that spell that does that.
Yeah, which is frustrating.
Yeah. Harry Potter does it as well.
We'll do an episode on that eventually. Harry Potter's magic system makes sense, but it also doesn't.
It's good for a children's book because it's very simple.
Yes.
It's just spells.
But it's simple in the fact that it has no rules initially. It gets rules later. But I think it's one of these things where when you're constructing magic systems, the reason that they work is that you can be like, the reason magic is cool is when we're impressed by it.
Yeah.
So like the cool thing about the sympathy system is that when Kavoth does something extremely clever, we know it's clever because we understand the system.
Yeah.
So like there's some awesome, like the thing with the tree, like in the lightning, no one else would have thought to do that, and it's so cool and clever at the time that you go, oh, that was really clever that he did that. Yeah.
Even if it's something like convenient, it's just like, oh, it's convenient that the lightning like sort of there was like a storm or whatever. But it's like, even if it's like, oh, it was just convenient timing. It's like, but it still was impressive because, you know, he had the foresight of using stuff that was happening, like, and
creating this. It's that kind
like
of,
if the lightning wasn't there, he probably would have used something else.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that makes it kind of interesting is that what it means is that during really important moments in the story, like particularly action scenes, at no point are you like, there's never a point where you feel like the characters aren't in danger, because he uses sympathy a lot when he's in these situations, and there's never a point where you're like, oh, he's gonna be fine, because every time there's a risk of it going wrong, if he gets the calculations wrong and he transfers too much heat or too little, or like he uses his body heat too much. Like, there's never a situation where he turns around and goes, oh, well, thank God I've got the perfect sympathetic binding to solve the situation. That never happens. He's like, oh, I can make a rudimentary solution that's going to get me through the next step of this conflict.
Well, yeah, even with the lightning example again, like, even if it was a case where it's like, oh, if the lightning wasn't there, like maybe he'd like use something else. But maybe it's a case of like, if the lightning wasn't there, he wouldn't have been able to do it. But it just goes to show that because he's so well, like, because he knows what he's doing to such a high degree, he's able to just think on the fly that like, oh, I'm in a storm, I can use the lightning in this way.
Yeah, it's an immediate...
When in most, like, it's not a normal occurrence. He's not just like, oh, he doesn't plan to use the lightning of the storm in every fight.
He didn't go, that's how I kill bandits.
Yeah,
it was
he's just like, oh, there's a storm, I can use that, and I know how to... And obviously, like, with the tree exploding, he doesn't do it perfectly. Yeah. It's the slippage. So it's like... It shows that, like, he knows what he's doing to a degree, but he's still prone to just, sort of underestimating or overestimating.
It's kind of bullying through to get the result, And, like, I think the reason that's why it works so well is that it's a toolkit that the Arcanist takes into any situation. And the more clever you are, the more power you wield.
Yeah.
And it means that it rewards intelligence, not strength. And it rewards cleverness, not,
being lucky or just being, I don't know, being liked by the writer.
Yeah, like, you're not just the chosen one.
It's not a case of, oh, you're the self-insert for the author, so therefore you get all the good spells.
Exactly. And there's great, like, he's also really bad at other stuff. Like, he's terrible at maths. He's not a great mathematician, like...
Which is why he blows the tree up, almost.
Yeah, he's not good at... like, he hates poetry, and he's terrible at poetry, and, like, it's a big running thing that people make fun of him for being a poet because he hates it. Like, he's not perfect, and it means that when he wields this magic, he makes mistakes sometimes. And, like, the fact that, so that the scene where he uses the body to kill the bandits is followed immediately by the lightning thing.
Okay.
So, because he's expended so much heat and energy in using that body as a binding, and he's killed and wounded so many of the bandits that, like, he's getting binders chills, and he goes, how do I fix this problem? And he goes, and he panics, and just without, like, Rothfuss doesn't write, and then he thought about the bindings. He just goes through the steps of, like, Kavoth's like, okay, shoot an arrow at that tree, do this, and then he's like, he mutters these bindings, this happens, the lightning strikes, Kavoth blacks out, and you get him coming to, and you don't really get an explanation of how it happens, but you get him it slows down in the writing so that you can kind of reflect as you read.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, well, he didn't die because he bound the lightning to the tree to himself, to the arrow. Like, you kind of work it through, and then they go outside and they look at the wreckage of what happened, and you kind of piece it together.
Yeah.
But I think that works because the system is so robust that you can step through it yourself after you've walked away.
Yeah.
It's just, it's so clever. Like, it's so well executed.
It's a system with rules.
Yeah, and they're rules that are very sort of... They make sense, and they mean that in any situation you understand the stakes and the difficulties.
Yeah, we've talked about rules in world building
probably
before.
Many times. Yeah,
I think we had a whole episode.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on world building and why rules matter.
Why rules are important.
I'm sure. I mean, it'll come up again and again when we do these magic episodes. But, like, I think, but the really good thing about Sympathy is it starts to feel mundane sometimes because it's used so much in the university by these arcanists. But then Kavoth will do something, like, amazing with it, just out of the blue, to fix a problem, and you go, holy fucking shit, Sympathy's so cool.
Yeah.
And then,
it's like physics. Physics is awesome.
And you're like, oh my god, that's awesome. And then sometimes, like, there's also a whole bunch of other different types of magic in this world, but they all have their own rules, except for naming, which is a magic system without rules. But that works because you have a system with rules.
Yeah.
So it's able to sit outside that, and it's like the storybook magic in inverted commas. So, like, you can call the name of the wind, or you can, like, summon fire or whatever.
Yeah.
But that stuff is, like, no one... Like, people aren't walking around wielding that willy-nilly, whereas almost any arcanist can use Sympathy because it's just physics.
Yeah. Like, is that other magic like a case where it's, like, it's basically just applied sympathy?
No,
almost?
It's...
or is it separate completely?
No, it's completely separate. Okay. Like, it's a totally different system, yeah. And not many people can use it, and it's, like... It's like this bit... Like, it's kind of more of a... It's more closer to, like, what you would consider to be like magic that you might see in, like, a cartoon or something.
Yeah. Like,
characters will throw fireballs or, like, summon the wind or whatever it is. If you learn someone's true name, you have power over them, kind of thing. Which is sort of interesting because I think you combine, like, you take that and it gives you a foil for the Sympathy, and it means that the Sympathy feels even more grounded.
Yeah.
And everything else involved with Sympathy feels even more grounded. So then when someone uses the other magic, it makes it feel even more extraordinary. So they're both benefited by being in the same world.
Yeah. It would be cool if it was, like, sort of just basically applied sympathy, because then you get a sort of parallel where like recent, like with sort of odd parallel, but with a lot of religion, especially Eastern religion in the world, real world, you get like stuff like meditation and like a lot of like massage techniques. You know, they're practiced as part of a religion, and they have like spiritual backings. But then, you know, recently we've been like, oh, meditation actually has like medical benefits that we've tested scientifically, and it would be cool if there's like a magic system in that world where it's like the people who practice it think it's some weird mystical spiritual energy, but really it's just applied sympathy. Yeah, and it's just like you're just using the same techniques, you just call it something different, and you think it's super magic, and really it's just based on something we understand.
That's kind of what most of the world thinks of sympathy. So they think it's like
just applied physics.
No, most of the world thinks sympathy is like crazy, like blood magic or whatever. Okay. They don't know how it works, so they're all fearful of it. And so like at one point they go to like a hick town because he's going to investigate something. Yeah, and they're like, he's like a scare, like they're terrified of him, and he performs sympathy, and they're like, oh my god, you saved the entire town.
So he's like Jesus.
Kind of, but like all of the Arcanists, but they're not really, because it's thought of as being like this dirty kind of. It's like they're like burn them at the stake kind of thing. They're more like witches. Like they're all viewed as like these like kind of like pariahs, but people are also terrified of them because they don't really understand how it works. Yeah. So he'll do shit.
That's like, a very obvious parallel to.
Yeah. So like he'll do shit like he'll walk into a room, and to scare someone he'll put out all of the lamps or all of the candles just with a simple binding or whatever. And then he'll light them up again, and they'll be like, "Oh my god, like there's a fucking way, like
voodoo magic,
it's a spooky Arcanist, you know." But then secretly for him, it's just physics. But then he views naming as the same thing that they view sympathy as. So it's like the next step up, the next level.
Yeah. And then I wonder if they do like sort of in the future Explorer, where it's just, you know, there is logic behind.
Like you get a feeling for how the naming works, but I think it's more mystic. Well, it's not mystical, but it's sort of more.
It's an interesting technique.
It's more abstract.
You're given. Because your point of view as the reader is one where you understand sympathy, but you don't understand those. Whereas it could easily be a book where your point of view is from the Hicks, where you don't understand anything. Yeah. So because you're shown that perspective, it's almost like, as a reader, you're like, oh, maybe these, like the naming systems, maybe they have rules, but because you're in the perspective of the main character you're in, it's like he doesn't understand what they are, so you as a reader
kind of don't either. Yeah, it's interesting, and as he kind of starts to learn the naming stuff, but the way that he learns it is so well done, because he doesn't learn how to use that magic. He learns like it's almost like a philosophy kind of. So like he learns, because naming is all about seeing. It's like you have like a sleeping mind and a waking mind, and it's all about tapping into your sleeping mind that can see things as they truly are.
Well, yeah, because that's that idea of like. You don't know what it's the idea of you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. Where it's like, if you're brought up, if you're in a sort of position, in a state of mind where you understand, like you understand physics and you understand like how the world works, but then there like could easily be like layers on top that you don't understand. And because you don't understand them, someone who introduces them to you, you would see it as being kind of like philosophical mumbo jumbo, because it's like, oh, I don't understand it, so of course someone explaining it to me isn't going to help. Yeah Because like, you know, it's you get into a lot of like spirituality kind of discussion with that sort of ideology.
Well, it's kind of that's kind of the parallel that Rothfuss draws with the naming stuff. Like it kind of ends up being quite philosophical, because it's about sort of like the guy who teaches him naming, they do all kinds of weird shit, like they just do all kinds of fucking bananas stuff for him to like for Kavoth to like tap into his sleeping mind. They just do a bunch of weird crap, like there's a storm coming and his teacher is like, we need to experience this fully, so they break into the roof of one of the buildings at the university, and his teacher's like, we should probably be naked so that we can experience the storm properly. And then they get locked out.
That's really weird.
Get found naked. And it's just like weird shit like that. And then, you know, he goes away for this journey and he learns a bit about the philosophy behind. It turns out that there are these people that have this fighting style that mirrors kind of the way that you learn naming, where it's all about instinct and it's about knowing the true way of things. And so he learns that, which coincidentally helps with the naming, and they kind of go hand in hand.
No, that's parallel too. It's parallel to Tibetan monks.
It's very similar, yeah.
How like they, you know, people go up and I'm pretty sure it's Tibetan monks, where they do that thing where they basically just sit on spears and shit. And it's like when they say it's like, oh, it's like chi, like they're just putting chi into a certain area to protect that area of the body, and you get scientists who are like, no, let's figure out how it actually does, and they go and they watch it and they try to figure it out, and they're like, we kind of don't know. Like we partly they don't know because the monks don't let them do proper tests. There's a bit of a sneaky thing where they'll just show them it. And then the scientists will be like, well, I don't know because, I don't know how much force you're putting on.
They're like, I need to measure that.
Like, I need to measure it. And they're like, no, you can't measure it or else it won't work. And you're like, fucking. So it's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing.
It maintains a mysticism for them as well. Because I guess for them it would be hard to then do it if it was like, well, actually what you're doing is you're applying the right amount of serotonin and blah, 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 blah.
Or it could just be a case of, you're just bending the pole really efficiently. You're not actually putting that much, because when they do it, they bend the poles of the spear. But it could just be the wood they use for the spear is quite flexible.
Yeah, like you don't. Yeah, it's hard.
There's a lot of areas of variability that they don't let them measure.
Which I think, like, if you can capture that in a system, it makes it really interesting to look at, because like, the naming stuff compared to the sympathy. If you didn't have the sympathy, then it would be really hard to find the naming stuff impressive, because the sympathy stuff, there are hard limits on what you can do most of the time because of just the amount of energy you have, or the heat, or the linking, or whatever it is. But whereas the naming stuff, it doesn't seem to have those limits in place. But if you didn't know that the other thing had limits, you would just not be impressed. Yeah, you'd be like, oh well, he called the name of the wind, like, okay, whatever. But when you see, like, early on, Kavoth tries to use sympathy to call the name of the wind, so he binds the air in his lungs to the air outside to create like a breeze.
That's a horrible idea.
Yeah, because
that's a lot of air.
Yes, and it's like trying to lift a mountain with your lungs.
Yeah.
And so he just suddenly like starts to choke and suffocates, and one of the other characters has to actually call the real name of the wind to save him.
Yeah.
But the fact that you knew that immediately before I said it means that the system is so easy to understand.
Yeah, there's a lot of wind out there.
Yeah, you were like, oh, well, obviously you can't lift a mountain with your lungs, so like he's going to suffocate.
Yeah.
But the fact that the system is that simple to understand means that when someone actually calls the name of the wind, you're like, holy crap.
Like, oh, okay.
Like, whoa, that's
Wait
crazy.
a minute.
Yeah, like it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's like a real key to a magic system, is finding those baselines and having something to compare to that is easy to access.
Yeah.
Like, just, you have to have a baseline with rules, and from there you can have other stuff. But the baseline, baseline has to have hard rules.
In the same sense that a lot of people, you get a lot of like new agers essentially who are like, yeah, I believe in science, but also all of this other mumbo jumbo stuff.
Yeah.
But you're like, sure, whatever, believe what you want, but there's obviously a reason why these people who agree with logical systems would then go on to believe in something.
Yes.
Based on loose logical systems, you could argue.
Or logical systems that exist, but they're not tangible.
They're not really tested. Or whatever. But like if you feel that way, it's like, that's fine. Like, it's a kind of, it's just religion, fucking just don't, force it down me. I don't care.
Yeah, do your thing.
Yeah.
Do what you do.
About religion
you do you over there.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing where it's just like, and that naming system's kind of taking it a step forward, where it's just like, not only do they believe in this kind of thing, but they're able to actually do things with it.
Yes, but I think, like if you're constructing a magic system, or you're looking at magic systems, like keeping that in mind is really important.
Mysticism is still powerful.
Yes. Yeah. That's the upshot. Even if it is logical mysticism and there are rules behind it, you have to have you can't have. Like, a world where magic exists is fine, and a world where everyone has magic is fine. But there has to be something that is mystical about it. And even in this world where it's very physics-based, there is mysticism about it, because people believe that they're like these dark arcanists or whatever, or they have blood magic or whatever. But then, even for those people, there is something that is mystical, which is the naming. And then even for namers, they have stuff that they would find mystical. Yeah. Because that's how people work. Yeah. It's just kind of,
that's how life happens.
Yeah, it's just kind of a cool progression, and I just think it's such an awesome magic system that it falls into that category of stuff I'm jealous I didn't think of. Yeah. It's so good. Like, it's so well done.
No, there's Fruit Ninja, that.
Yeah. So, Fruit Ninja and that, and maybe Skyrim. Like, maybe the Elder Scrolls. Like, maybe that. I think that's about it. But yeah, I mean, that'll probably do it for this episode. Yeah, I mean, check out the books if you haven't already. I'll link all that stuff in the show notes. But
You're a huge fan of the author as well, so...
He's fantastic, yeah. I did a video on him, which I'll link as well. Yeah. He's just, like, he's so sensational at what he does. And I think if you're going to study anyone and you want to write fantasy, you have to read him. Because he's at the pinnacle of what you can do with fantasy as a genre.
Yeah.
Where can people find us, Ben?
Oh, shit. Podcast at dcm.works.
Yes.
If you want to email us, you shit.
Yeah.
But words.
Probably words, not actual poop. Don't mail us poop.
Don't mail us poop.
redbubble.com/people/dcmworks.
T-shirts. There's a Twitter somewhere.
There's a Twitter, all that stuff.
dcm.works.
Hashtag AFApod.
Yeah.
If you
YouTube,
get any Facebook...
Do we have a Tumblr?
No.
We're never getting one.
Never, ever. Rule. That's it. Never.
Rule.
Never getting a
Tumblr.
Tumblr.
Never getting a Tumblr.
And we always ask that if you get any value from the show, you consider giving a little bit of value back, mate. Just give it a like or a favorite or a share or
comment,
subscribe. Upvote, downvote, thumbs up, love heart, reaction emoticon, smiley face.
Don't reaction. I don't want to get a fucking lawsuit from Fine Brothers and this shit.
Smiley face.
God damn.
Yeah, good.
Fucking react well. Bullshit.
But this has been For Us, and we'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye.
It's amazing. Yeah, the visuals are very well done, and the gameplay is super fun. And because those three things are there, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah. Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make good art.
Yeah.
That's just the truth of it.